Like growing up, I was never allowed to date. I had to like sneak out to prom or like, fake that I didn't have one. Sorry, I take that back. I was allowed to go, but they didn't know I had.
Who's this girl running down the street barefoot, holding her heels towards a limo? Oh, that's an Indian girl. She's not allowed to do jack squat.
Exactly. No, but like my parents, I didn't know I had a date, right? So like I had to stage our photos in a way that nobody knew that. And back then there was no social media, thank God. But like I could hide the pictures of my dates so my parents didn't know, things like that. Then the flip is like the second you turn 22, it's like, all right, you're done. You graduated college. Let's get married. And it's like, but I never got to interact with the opposite sex. I never got to flirt. I never got to understand that part of my life. So for me, I know like, losing my virginity or having sex for the first time was a big deal because
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Introspect Club, a club where you can learn a lot about yourself through conversations with other people. My name is Jeff Damisse, and I'll be your host. Now, we've had conversations before about arranged marriages as well as how other cultures relate to each other when it comes to romance and relationships. So let's talk about Indian arranged marriages and the culture as a whole. Now, historically, there's been a lot of arranged marriages, arranged families combining with each other. But what happens to the Indian culture when they reach the Western world, right? How do the younger generation deal with the traditions of their families plus the needs of the modern world that they're currently living in? So I brought someone who is an Indian matchmaker with a twist. I call her the modern Indian matchmaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce you to Radha Patel. Welcome.
Thanks, Jeff. Very excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Pumped for the holiday.
Pumped for holidays. You got your festive. Is that a festive shirt? Am I looking at a festive shirt? Is that considered a festive shirt?
It can be festive, sure.
All right, we're gonna call it festive because I know mine's festive. I look like I'm in the woods. So give everybody a quick introduction of yourself so they can get familiar with you, and then give us an idea of what it is that you do and what your mission is and what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. So my name is Radha Patel. I'm the founder of Single to Shadi. Personally, I'm based out of suburban Dallas, married with children, but I've always been a connector and very interested in the South Asian kind of immigrant experience, being a first generation here. So when I heard from my friends and family how dating on the apps wasn't working for them, they weren't, wanting to their parents for help, but they were looking for meaningful ways to connect. I thought, what better way than for me, who loves connecting people and loves the culture, to put my spin on it. And so that's when we launched Single to Shadi, which is, as you mentioned, the modern take on matchmaking. And we are trying to redefine arranged marriages and the narrative around that.
Now, this is the modern take on matchmaking for Eastern Indians or just strictly Indians that live in the Western world?
It's only for those who live in the Western world. So we want to make sure that we're tying in the experiences of people who are born and raised in the Western world, such as America and Canada, and bring that evolution into the matchmaking process as well.
So let me ask you a question, right? So how different are the needs of a modern, Indian individual compared to someone in the United States that's looking to get matched up, someone that's looking to get married or be in a relationship? What are the differences that requires a specific Indian matchmaker?
I think outside of the nuances of culture, such as like food, language, traditions, I think that there's nuances in the sense that maybe in this, I'm speaking generally, but the Indians in the US, we still hold on to that idea of wanting to have marriage or wanting to be in a committed relationship before starting a family. So all of those kind of quote unquote traditional values still, I think, are a little bit more motivating when it comes to the dating process for Indians versus the typical American person out there who's looking for a date.
So you're saying that Indians within the culture have more intention in how they pursue courtship, right?
Yeah, I say marriage minded in the sense that, yeah, we're not going to get married to the next person we meet. But the idea is if the dating, we're dating, the first 2 or 3 conversations go well, then the heavy stuff's going to come out. Whereas in like a normal relationship, I say normal being like a modern American relationship, you might date for a year or 2 before you have those heavy conversations because you just want to see where it goes. You're not necessarily saying that this has to end in marriage. So then that's like the fundamental difference I see. That is evolving, right? There's so many more of my generation that are coming out there. Like, I still want to date around. I still want to see kind of what's out there and figure out if marriage is my goal.
Yeah. Wait, so you're saying for an Indian like courtship process, like they'll have like a first date and then the serious conversation starts of like, okay, when is the wedding? How serious are we talking about? Like,
probably not that serious, but things like, do you see yourself settling down the next 2 to 3, or like whatever your time frame is, right? Do you want to have children? I think that the Indian people in America are also very, they're transient. So we might meet because we both live in New York City, but I might want to settle back in Michigan where I grew up, or I want to raise my family there. So having those kind of serious conversations about what the future looks like, I think comes up much sooner when it comes to Indian dating.
You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like the average 40-year-old dating, right?
Yeah.
So like these Indians who are seeking partners are how old approximately?
Oh, if you ask the parents, I get people calling me as young as like 19.
Oh,
yeah.
Damn. That's a little much.
And I politely tell them, no, you need to go live your life and then come back. But our average range, and when I look at our numbers, are like in the mid to upper 30s.
Really?
Because I think that people are trying to do it on their own. They're trying to live their life, advance their careers. And then you've got the nuances of, well, I really want to be serious. I'm not finding the serious people in the avenues that I'm using. What's the next step? Oh, let me hire a matchmaker. Then I know they're serious.
Yeah, but see, now I'm confused, right? Because when I think of Indian matchmaking as well as like arranged marriages as a whole in multiple cultures, the people typically start really young, right? So even though when you said 19, me personally, I don't agree with someone 19 settling down and making a lifelong decision in today's environment. But I would imagine in a traditional environment or a traditional culture, that is more of the angle, is to start early. So is there a reason why your clients aren't below 30?
Well, I think it's really because of the prevalence of different ways of meeting people, right? So now you've got the apps, you've got, people are networking in their careers and they're still meeting people organically or through these apps, right? So they're not thinking that I need help. I think that a lot of times the traditional views of matchmaking means I'm going to get married tomorrow through an arranged marriage process, or
that's how
it's
happens.
kind of right, or kind of admitting like I can't do this on my own, and that's like a personal struggle that a lot of people, even in non-Indian spaces, if you're hiring a matchmaker, you're kind of giving that decision-making power to somebody else. So you have to be ready for that. And older people tend to have done that work and understand that about what they're looking for.
And that is also true. But what I'm thinking about in my mind is like the people that you're serving. I feel like there's a large population of people who are in their late 30s who are also seeking to get married, but aren't necessarily Indians. So I'm trying to figure out what the difference is with their needs versus an Indian person's needs who also want to get married. Because my assumption was Indian, especially who are very traditional, that's always been their mindset. find somebody, be married, make the family happy, grow the family, et cetera, right? And that starts like in your teens. That's being pushed into. That's my understanding of it. But you're saying,
yeah, you've grown up with that concept, right? Like if that's your traditional and that like you're literally it's been brainwashed into you is get married, 22, you graduate, get married, start a family. Like that's kind of like your roadmap in life if you're on that traditional track. But I think the beauty of being in America now and like emigrating and blending the modern culture with our traditional culture is that we're able to push back and be like, no, I think I want to go to get my master's degree, or no, I think I want to work my way up. And so you've got the traditional families who are like, nope, we're going to get you married at 22, but they're the ones who have already kind of found a match, if you will, or have already been talking. Their parents have already been working on it behind the scenes. They're not the ones who are approaching me proactively for themselves.
Okay. So those are the ones who were dragging their feet too long. And now they're like, I need some help here. Right.
Or not just like, I'm really a big believer in like self-discovery and self-awareness. So, taking the time to know who you are and what you want in life, while traditionally that might never have been something that was appreciated. From my perspective, I want that. I want my clients to come to me saying, I know what I want in my future. Can you help me find it?
How involved are the parents in that pursuit with your clients?
You get a lot of that family pressure. I ask about the motivations and it's like, oh, my mom's on my case or my dad's really like disappointed. So I try to separate that family dynamic from what their motivations are for marriage. Because I mean, you know this too, Jeff, right? From the Introspect Club stories I've been listening to, you can't change or force a feeling or do something for somebody else. It's only going to last for so long. I think that's like the real imposter syndrome. You can only make other people happy for so long.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. But at the same time, there's a lot of influence that comes from an entire culture of people. So I imagine like that's always going to be in the back of that person's mind. Right. Which is probably why there's been so many like extended lineages of Indians who had arranged marriages, because it was, preceded by the family. Like, hey, we're presenting you with these options, marry this. And that's been like the cultural thing. Right.
Yep.
I imagine the, family members from your past, they've gotten arranged marriages. You're Indian, right?
Correct. Yes.
So were your parents in an arranged marriage?
I was actually lucky enough to have an amazing example of a love marriage is what they call it. Basically my parents found each other
and they had to leave the country to make it work.
They did. No, there was a lot of family drama. One person's from a good family, one's from a not. They didn't run away from the country, but somebody else had to facilitate their marriage because my grandparents were not about it at the time. So I was lucky enough to come from an upbringing of somebody who exhibited free choice in their marriage and went against norms. And maybe that is playing a part into why I decided to do matchmaking now as an adult and kind of make that my career and ambition, because I know that it could work. Like the ideas of arranged marriage, they were rooted in security for the family, progressing the lineage, but there's more that a human being needs than just that evolutionary concept, like love, fulfillment, potential. All of that also drives us as creatures. And so again, like I said, I was just blessed to have that story in my life through my parents' example.
Yeah, your parents.
But not a lot of people were.
Yeah, your parents were pretty much like trailblazers, because if your grandparents didn't agree with their marriage and they basically had to run away and for lack of better words, like go to a different facilitator of the marriage, that speaks volumes to how much pressure is put on Indian individuals, especially young individuals who aren't really familiar with themselves, to like be married and so on and so forth. Right.
And my mom tells me horror stories about how her extended family members would talk down to her dad about how can you let her get away with this? She's ruining the name. Like it was a lot of drama and trauma as well that they had to go through. And again, like I said, I was blessed because I was able to process that my entire life and have that as my narrative. But I also, growing up in the culture, had aunts and uncles who did have arranged marriages. I have cousins who had arranged marriages. So I do see it, and I have experienced it secondhand, if not firsthand.
Were you ever pressured by any family members to be in an arranged marriage at any point in time?
From the second I turned 22, probably.
From the second you turned 22, they're like, here are suitors. This person can breed.
Literally, like, he's got a job. He's alive. We know his family. Get married. And you're like, is that all not how it works.
But is that all it takes for like ancestors or just family members to find somebody qualified? Like, what do the elders seek as qualifying things for marriage, and what are your clients or just any modern Indian, what are they typically looking for that's different?
If you talk about to the older generation, they'll always say, we just want a good family. We want a suitable family.
So
and that is so coded.
They don't care about the individual. They care about the family. It's like the kid could be a deadbeat idiot, but the family is a strong name and it's reputable. Like, what?
Exactly. And it does happen. I've heard of so many divorces and things happening now now that we're empowered because the parents got them married and the guy turned out to be a dud, or the girl never actually, actually had the career she promised she was going to get. Things like that happens all the time because when you only have parents talking to each other, they're going to present the best light and they're always going to be like, my kid's amazing.
Yeah.
And so you're judging it at the family level to the point where you're like, oh, my mom would always be like, do you know who so-and-so's grandfather was? I'm like, I don't care who his grandfather was. Like, what does he do now? What are his merits and qualifications? That dichotomy is still present.
Okay. So, but what are the modern Indian singles paying attention to that the elders weren't paying attention to?
More so that compatibility, right? I don't think our elders ever took into account, like, are these two going to get along? Will they love each other? Will they create a nurturing environment for the family that they want, if they want to create, right? I don't think they thought of that. They just thought that if everything lines up on paper, what could go wrong, right? But my clients are like, I want somebody who gets me. I want somebody who speaks my love language. I want somebody who's going to support me, somebody who understands what I've been through and kind of like wants to experience life together and just a lot more conscious decision making in the choice of the matter. Yeah.
But does that actually make it harder to match individuals now? Because the things that made people match on paper, it's very tangible, right? You can say this person has a job, this person can cook, this person can breed, the end, right? But now it's like, I want the person to like hiking as much as I do. Like, does that not complicate it more and make it a little bit more difficult to find compatibility?
It does. It absolutely, I'm not going to say it's going to complicate it, but it's just going to add in more layers of where we need to make sure that people are vibing, but at the end of the day, do you really want to be in a relationship for hopefully 30, 40 years with a person that you just kind of like sit on the couch with and watch TV? They don't care about your dreams. They're not here to motivate you and push you. While it might be harder to find that person, when you do find them, the love, the joy, the fulfillment that comes from that relationship experience makes the journey worth it, in my opinion.
I can imagine that. And if they're seeking for different things now, I'm imagining like on the Western side, the modern Indian has more modern needs, both men and women, right? So, but specifically Indian singles, what are some of the things that they seek in a man or seek in a woman that is specific to like an Indian?
Yeah, I would say, okay, from a female perspective, if you're looking for a man, a lot of it is going to be still the good family concept. So ensuring that they're well educated or at least equally matched, because modern women are getting their advanced degrees and killing it in their career. So we want to make sure that there's no insecurity from an income earning potential perspective.
Okay.
I think women also are looking for a little bit of that evolutionary, right? I want that tall, strong man who's going to make me feel protected. And I think for women, a lot of it is, I want somebody who understands me, because, and why I say this is, and I've known this in my own life, is that we grew up in, our parents speak one language. We grew up in America. We're speaking and conversing in English. And while I can't speak in my language, right, I probably sound like a drunk 12-year-old when I'm talking in my language. I can't express complex emotion. I can't do like long form discussions in that language. So my conversations with my parents end up being much more transactional. And, there's a lot of competition in the Indian community with like, so-and-so's daughter did this or so-and-so's son is a doctor. So we get a lot of that, that emotional kind of like stunt, I think that because we don't have the right way to express our emotions. So when we are seeking a partner, females primarily are like, I want somebody who gets me. I want somebody I can talk to and share my feelings with, because we might not necessarily have had that growing up.
That's an interesting concept, right? We're going to get to the guy side, right?
Okay.
I never actually thought about that. Like if you're an Indian individual who migrated to the West when you were young, you didn't get to have the bonding experience with your family when there's a language barrier if you grew up learning a different language, right? So what they're seeking in their partner is another home base that they can kind of like release themselves on, because their family is not the resource for that. I never actually thought about that. That's actually a good point. So go on. So you're saying with the men?
For men, a lot of it is, again, on the evolutionary side, is they want to have families and they want to have children and they want to create that culture environment. They might not necessarily participate in themselves actively, but I hear a lot of them, they want to pass that on. So I don't know if it's like this evolutionary concept of like, I need my lineage and my name to continue, but I am seeing for men, a lot of their motivating factors is, I want to start a family. What point in their life they get to that realization does vary. I'm getting to see a lot more of my male clients are in their mid to late 40s, kind of what you had mentioned about how people who are serious in the American culture end up being in their 40s. I'm seeing that happen on the male side.
But is that specific to Indians or is that just men in general?
Oh, that's a great question. Since I primarily work with Indians, I'm going to say I see it with Indians, but there might be a larger evolutionary concept that happens with men in general that is probably skewing that way. And it's now evidencing in the Indian world because they have the autonomy of choice. It's not like their parents are making them get married at 25 anymore. So they are choosing and flexing to be like, I'm going to wait a little bit later. I still want that family, but I want it a little bit later.
So how much emphasis do Indians, whether it's Western or Eastern Indians, how much emphasis do they place on vanity and chastity?
Let's see. Family, you would think that chastity is like the number one thing. Like when growing up, I was never allowed to date. I had to like sneak out to prom or like, fake that I didn't have one. Sorry, I take that back. I was allowed to go, but they didn't know I had to.
Who's this girl running down the street barefoot, holding her heels towards a limo? Oh, that's an Indian girl. She's not allowed to do jack squat. Exactly.
No, but like my parents, I didn't know I had a date, right? So like I had to stage our photos in a way that nobody knew that. And back then there was no social media, thank God. But like I could hide the pictures with my dates, so my parents didn't know, things like that. I had to sneak around a lot. Bottom line. Then the flip is like the second you turn 22, it's like, all right, you're done. You graduated college. Let's get married. And it's like, but I never got to interact with the opposite sex. I never got to flirt. I never got to understand that part of my life. So for me, I know like losing my virginity or having sex for the first time was a big deal because there was so much scandal or taboo. Like, I don't know who I could tell, or I don't know how, even within my own family, like my cousins or my friend group, like, could I share this with them? Can we talk openly about it? Yeah. Because it's such a high importance and value placed on chastity. And I think across cultures, not just Indian, any culture, for females, that pressure is always higher.
But it's even more so in Indian cultures, though, I would imagine, right? Especially if traditionally a lot of people married young, right?
And that's probably why, right? If you look at all the different cultures, it's not just Indian. There's a lot of other religions out there that marry young for that reason, because they want to preserve that chastity. And they know that like, hey, horny teenagers is not a good combination if you want chastity. Get them married instead.
Wow. But what about vanity?
Vanity, well, I like to say that, Indian culture is so beautiful. Like, and I'm not tooting my own horn, but our women, we dress colorfully. We've got beauty standards. Some of them might be ridiculous with the whole fairness concept. But I think for the most part, if you talk to anybody out other cultures, there's a reason why there's a fetish around Indian women and dating Indian women is because on the average, we are vanity wise, we do present differently. How about that?
Yeah, but there's got to be some scale for Indian men, right? Like, are they like looking for? Do they have any stigmas against like obesity or facial features or age? Things like that. Like, is there like something along the lines, or same thing with the women? Like, do they want the tall, brawny guy, or are they okay with a very successful, guy that's kind of lanky? What are we talking about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think for men, for sure, age is the big factor, and it kind of ties into the whole family concept I was mentioning earlier. They associate youth or age with fertility, maybe. And again, it might be evolutionary driven, but they do. There's like a big thing of clients who are insisting on having a 10-year age gap because they're in their late 40s. But then a woman in her late 30s doesn't necessarily want to date a guy in his late 40s. That's a huge age gap. Like, it's a generational difference there. So
different kind
having
of music.
to explain that. Yeah, exactly. It's like, you could have been my uncle. Like, this is weird.
What?
No, thanks.
You don't have an Instagram account? Ugh.
It literally like speak another language sometimes. If you imagine like a millennial with the Gen X, like that's a different language a lot of times. And then from the female standpoint, and again, I don't think this is just Indian women, but that tall, strong, I want a man who can take care of me idea is still very prevalent in my female clients.
Is that something that's easy to find in an Indian community?
Absolutely not. The joke is every woman is out there searching for a unicorn. I was lucky. My husband's 5'11". And again, for me too, I was like, I want somebody who's taller. And I actually happened to find it. But the average Asian man, and let alone South Asian man, is not going to be 6 foot tall. So it's like, are we looking primarily on aesthetics? Because looks fade, right?
Sure.
Maybe not height, but looks fade. Or there's a combination of personality and characteristics that can compensate for that biological need of having the tall, strong man.
So is there such thing as compromise? Like, are you telling your clients, listen, you got to give up this and this, and you'll get this, sign here? Like, does that happen?
Yes, there is compromise, but I don't like the words give up. I always like to present everything in a positive way. So when I talk about compromise,
He's great.
No, but
he's amazing. He's only got 3 toes, but listen, there's no judgment here. Okay. All right.
Actually, no, Jeff, if somebody tells me no, if I match them and they're like, no, Radha, I'm not interested, I will never try to convince them, because once you've made up your mind and that's kind of there, convincing somebody to change your mind, I don't think it's the right way to go. Sure. But instead, what I will do is, again, talk about those compromises. All right, well, let's see. What are some things you didn't like? And what can we change? And maybe for the next person, because you've talked about it, because you've changed your viewpoint on it, the next one will hit differently. I'm not here to change your mind, but I'm here to change your perspective.
Got it. So you're kind of doing some coaching at the same time.
Yes. We do work with amazing coaches just because our focus is more on that matching and finding the search process. But a lot of the coaching, it's just natural, right? In my conversations with clients, what I've known, what I've seen, it's going to come out. So coaching is fundamental, I think, to matchmaking.
But being that you are dealing with, Indians, traditional Indians, or at least who come from traditional backgrounds, right? Like, they're living in the modern world, and the modern world comes with a lot of complexities, right? Although there's a benefit for the freedom to, find a love match or find someone on your own without being in an arranged scenario. Would you say that arranged marriages last longer than love marriages in the Indian community?
Probably yes, but I'll tell you why, Jeff. It's not just because they're more successful. That's why they last longer. It's because if you're already coming from a traditional background that believes in arranged marriages, you're not going to get divorced either, right? Your family's that traditional that they're not going to believe in divorce. And I have heard horror stories of people in arranged marriage situations, and kind of referring back to earlier, where the guy could be a dud, the girl could be a dud. They got into this situation and now they feel stuck or helpless. And I don't want them to feel like that.
And that's happened like generationally, like in the community of Indians who are in arranged marriages.
Oh, yeah. And I think it's coming to light more now because we're feeling more empowered to share our stories and find the autonomy in our voices. So it's coming to light more. But I'm sure that this issue of compatibility has been around from the beginning of time. If you look at matchmaking across all cultures, right? Like I always like to point at the royal family in England because, if you watch The Crown or have done any sort of study on history, those marriages have been ridiculous, right? Like the stories that you hear, Henry VIII murdered eight of his wife, like all of that. So it's been around forever. The concept of arranged marriage is not being successful. It's just coming out more now. And with Indian culture being one of the last few cultures that still really rely on arranged marriages and matchmaking, it's the stigma tends to focus on our culture, but it's there in every corner.
What's the most dramatic arranged marriage story or outcome you've ever heard or been a part of?
Okay, so this is just what I've heard, maybe secondhand. I haven't necessarily experienced it myself or even know this person, but abuse to the point where people have to end up calling the authorities, and then you're being a victim and not knowing who to turn to, and that perpetuates to the next generation.
Yeah.
You see it because your children. Yeah, normalizing it, and then how that trickles down, and that trauma, even if it's not necessarily physical abuse, but the concept of bad in-law arrangements or that verbal abuse, that gets internalized, and that trauma takes generations to overcome. And so why I say that I've seen it secondhand is I've noticed it in friends and family members internalizing that trauma, trying to deal with it, how they're reflecting it back when they're looking for partners. It's a sad cycle, unfortunately.
So what are some benefits, if any, of arranged marriages that I guess is getting lost today?
If you talk to any people who are in healthy, happy, successful arranged marriages, like most of the auntie and uncle generation, what we call them, so like my parents and my uncles and all of them, they'll tell you the benefit is, especially if they have single kids, they'll tell you the first benefit is that at least you're married, right? Like you're done. That part is over with. Like that's like the first step is you got married, which is where a lot of people get stuck. So I would say that. Two, it's probably like you're willing to be more open-minded or compromise, maybe just because you're not the one who's putting in all these conditions or concepts of I want this and I want that. Your family's kind of saying like, here's the broad range stuff what we're looking for. As long as you're meeting that criteria, we think the compatibility or success rate is going to be good. I also think that, again, being in a more traditional environment, if you're in an arranged marriage, you've not dated, you don't know what's out there, you have nothing to compare it to. So your first relationship, if it happens to be your husband or your wife, chances are you're going to learn and grow together. And so a lot of times our parents say is that you will learn to love your spouse. And when you're young, you're like, I don't want to learn to love them. I want to fall in love and then make them my spouse.
Yeah.
From their perspective is you guys are growing up together. You're experiencing life together. Those shared bonds should lead to love.
Yeah. That's a good point, because when you're put in a scenario where you're, for lack of a better word, forced to learn somebody, you're kind of like with your feet to the fire, you kind of put a different emphasis and priority versus like when you're being distracted by all these other options, it gets a little bit more difficult, which I imagine is the reason why, Eastern Indians or not Eastern, Western Indians or anybody from the West in general would struggle because of how modernized it is and how ambiguous a lot of these relationships are, right? But
yeah, when I talk to clients about their her past relationship history, they tell me their first serious relationship versus what they're looking for. Yeah. And it's so introspective to see when you first met that person, you fell in love. Buzzword. So because you were like, oh, this person paid attention to me. He's interested in me. I can actually go on a date because I'm in college. Let me test it out. And then they realize, oh my God, this guy was horrible. And I do want this and I don't want that. So when they come to me and they're like, this is what I'm looking for, they've kind of already understood that. So imagine if you married that first person you ever dated, how would you know what you wanted and what you didn't? And if you were married, then the chances are you're going to try to make it work even more so that the commitment is way more serious because you're already married. And so you're going to maybe look through some of those he leaves his wet towel on the bed, or some of those kind of like pet peeves and stuff that in your 20s can be like, I can find somebody better who fits me a little bit.
They're a little bit more dismissive a lot sooner. But like, let me ask you a question though. Like, so dealing with modern Western Indians who are no longer subscribing to the arranged marriages, maybe some do, but for the most part, a majority of them, I'm assuming, is not, right? Not subscribing to
that's why they come to me.
Right. So with you being in a picture and not the parents doing all the matching, what is your process in determining compatibility between like future partners or candidates to marry or be in a relationship? How do you know?
I think the key word you used there, Jeff, was future. Because I think so many people get stuck on, how do I get to the altar? How do I get to the marriage part, right? So they're like, I want tall, dark, and handsome. I want somebody who makes 6 figures. But it's like, okay, now you're married. What happens next? Yeah. So after I kind of establish a baseline, who they are, what they're into, what their personality is all about, then we talk about, well, what do you actually see for yourself in your married life or in a committed relationship, even if it's not marriage, right? Like being in a committed relationship. What are the important aspects? Is it, I want to feel safe, secure, and supported? Is it, I want somebody who's going to be a good provider because I want to create this family and this future? Is it, I want to live in, I want to travel the world, or I want to do community service? What are your motivations once you find this partner and in living your life? So that is going to help determine long-term compatibility. Because Jeff, if you're like, well, I want to go to Colombia and work from there for a month before I figure out what my next move is, versus you meet a girl who's like, I have a 5-year plan. I want to have this much in my 401k by the time I'm 40, You guys might not necessarily align with how you want to live your lives and live your futures. So that compatibility spans a lot more than just, can we get along right now? And I dive into that.
See, that's a good point. I've always said, like, find somebody who fits you for where you're headed, not for where you are.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, because a lot of people, I'll give myself one of these. Because a lot of people are fixated on where they're at, and they're like, I need somebody who understands me and who I am, and just in the present, right? Which sounds pleasant to say, be in the present, and so on and so forth. But relationships is a growing thing. The definition of relationship includes time, right?
Yes.
So when you're talking about being with somebody, and I used to make this mistake as well, like I noticed a pattern in me when I was growing up, when I was younger. I was dating whoever I was with, and at the moment I like made a leap in my life, right? Made a change, or had a certain level of success that was different from before. I'll be honest, the person I was with, I kiboshed them, right? They were, because they were no longer fitting to the setting that I was in. If I was smart enough to predict where I was going, I would have made different decisions on who I was with. But I was young, right? But I think that's...
Well, let me ask you about that then, Jeff. Again, you said you would make a different decision. Were you approaching those relationships with the idea of like, I want this to be long-term? Or was it kind of like, in the moment, I'm with her or him and it makes sense?
I didn't even know. To be honest with you, it was one of those things where, like, when you're young, you just value being in you value being with someone that cares about you, right?
Right.
And you care about them, right? And then in your mind, you're thinking, this is going to turn into something. You don't know what it is. You know that eventually people get married. You don't know how you get to that point. And sometimes that's the only destination they give you. Sometimes the only destination they give you as a young person is like, find somebody that's good enough for you to marry. But marriage is, to a lot of people, is the destination to a relationship, when in reality it's like, there's so many things beyond that, right?
Should be the intermission.
Yeah, to me, like, marriage is like a celebration of a relationship that just got started. It's not. It's not like, oh, we figured it out, so we're getting, like, it's stupid. Because to me, a lot of people that get married, they have this grandiose experience, which we got to talk about, because Indian weddings are crazy. Okay,
yes,
like nonsensical. Okay, but like, you go through this grand experience, and I've come to learn that, like, a lot of people, they have a false idea of what's supposed to happen after, because they're not, no one really talks about it as much, right? They assume
Absolutely.
that once you get married, it's like there's this template of things that's just going to happen because you're married now.
I would say too, your experience, what you just described, Jeff, is what I would say the difference between intentional dating or marriage-minded dating versus casual dating.
Right. No, that's fair.
Yeah. And each has a place. There's nothing wrong with either. But when you know I'm intentionally dating, that's when those serious questions come out. And that's when that long-term view starts coming out. That's the difference.
No, I mean, that's definitely a factor. And I've started to see a little bit of that in some of the experience that I've had, as well as other people have had. But at the same time, like when you're talking about a different culture, like Indians, I feel like they were brought up to be intentional.
Yes.
Right. And anyone that wasn't intentional probably made an effort to not be intentional, to like rebel. Right. That's an opinion that I have. I don't know if it's accurate or whichever. Right.
Or you don't even know, right? If you have no idea how relationships work, if you come from an arranged marriage, you've never seen anybody date in your life, you've never seen your parents be intimate ever, how do you even know what the difference is? You don't.
No, that's true. But right now, you are, left with the job of finding compatibility between these people who might not know what they want, who might not know everything that fits for them. So you're there to kind of, source out the compatible person for them, right? Mm-hmm, but how often do you use your situation, your current, relationship experience as a benchmark for how you coach and provide partnership for your clients? Does that come into play?
I use my relationship for everything. It was the basis of how I found like our founding principles for Single to Shadi. I knew for me, it was important. I wanted somebody who was similar immigrant experience as me, had parents that came from a certain background, whatever. And then I went out and kind of like, I always say this now, I went out and manifested it, but I learned those words later. After talking to clients and figuring out and learning a little bit more about what it means to be intentionally dating or like working with other people, that's when I got the words. But I use my experience often because, my husband and I had a very short courtship because we both knew we were marriage minded. It was intentional. We met each other. We hit it off. We dated for a few months. We started meeting each other's families and extended, friends group and stuff very quickly because we just felt that it worked. And within 6 months, we were engaged. And it wasn't because our family pressured us or anything like that. We both made that decision ourselves because we were intentional about what we were doing. So I use my example with my clients all the time. It's not going to be a 6-month process for everybody, but knowing kind of what you want and going into each new experience with those factors top of mind, it's going to help you make better decisions and maybe make better choices in who you're selecting as far as dating is concerned, so that when you're with that person, you get that 2 to 3 month, vibe going and you're like, I see a future. I'm going to continue to follow this up. Or what really helps for my clients is flipping that around. All right, it's been 2 or 3 months. I am not feeling it. This is not working. Yeah. It's not happening. Well, fine, let's cut our losses and let's move on. Instead of, I feel like in casual dating, you'd be like, but he's fun. I don't mind. We're still hanging out. Yeah, it's convenient. He lives in my building, whatever, things like that.
I've had that relationship. Yeah, but let me ask you a question though. Like, how old were you when you were dating your husband?
I met him at 25 and we got married at 26. I was a baby. I know.
Okay. So you were super intentional when you met your husband. You were 25. Yes. He was how old?
He was a year older than me, so he was 26.
He was 26. So if he was 26, you were 25. Would you say the average 25/26-year-old in the Western world is thinking like you, regardless of culture?
Regardless of culture? No, probably
okay.
not.
So which brings me to my next question. If you were brought up in the Indian culture to some degree, right? Yeah. Do you think you would have had the same urgency or put the same priority on being intentional? Or how much of your Indian culture contributed to your desire to have that kind of intentionality at 25?
Probably 90% of my Indian culture and upbringing. It was the reason why I decided to go down that path so early.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about that for a second, right? In a lot of ways, you basically cultivated a hybrid arranged marriage.
Yes, especially if you know how I met my husband.
How did you meet him?
I went to an Indian marriage convention specifically because those people are there to get married.
Okay. So basically the culture still prevails.
Yeah.
Just in this like backdoor way. So when you're talking about a 25-year-old woman and man going to a marriage convention, first of all, I don't even know that exists. Okay. That's number one. And number two, for you to be 25, when you're 25 and you're in the Western world, you're going to a music festival.
Born and raised here.
You're going to a music festival. You're not going to no marriage. Like that makes no sense to me in terms of what I would expect for a 25-year-old. So even then, as modern as you might be, you still live within the not want to use the boundaries. You still live within the realm of what traditions your family, evolved under, right?
Tradition still guided me, and that's because it was important to me. And I think that's the key distinction, Jeff, is that it's not important to everyone, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be, but because it was for me, it already set me down a path, or I had a whole system that was already up there and ready for me to just be like, say, yes, I'm ready, jump on this wave and go through the process.
So,
but I'll tell you, let me give you a little bit more though. Like it was a marriage convention, but I'll tell you, I've been going since I was in my mid to early 20s. But I went with my friends. I went with my cousins. It was like an excuse for us to party. And it was a sanctioned way for us to meet boys. Our parents would pay for us to go. It was like an early form of dating that was parent approved.
Meet men at a marriage convention.
When I'm 22, they're boys, right? Let's be honest.
Okay.
Takes a little more for the man part to kick in.
I got it. How long were you going to these marriage conventions? The first time?
Probably on and off. No, probably on and off for about 5 years.
See, I can't even deal with you right now because that means, okay, so let's go back. That means you've been marriage minded since 22, at least from the realm of what you were actively doing. For you to go to marriage conventions at 22, you know what 22-year-olds are doing now? They're twerking. I
was doing that then too. I was just able to do both.
You were twerking online?
Not online.
Okay.
But definitely was out there doing some questionable things out in the club. Yeah.
Things that would disqualify your marriageability. Got it. Yes. Anyway, all good things. But the point is, at 22, look at that mindset. At 22, you were intentional, even subconsciously, whether you knew it or not, right? 22-year-olds in the modern world, in the Western world, is not going to a marriage convention. I'm just telling you what it is. They're barely passing their classes in college that they're overpaying for, let alone going to a marriage convention. Okay.
Yep.
So that's part of the reason why I'm fascinated about the culture, because even when it comes to the West, it's still deeply rooted in the foundation of like the seriousness of relationships that you don't typically see in the modern Western world, which is why there's probably a niche for someone like yourself who is like serving the Western Indians, because there's still that ingrained cultural root there, right?
Yeah, because they want to be part of the culture. They want to carry on these traditions, but they also want to do it in their way, in a way that makes sense for them now, as somebody born and raised in this country who's been exposed to so much more, the internet. The last 20 years, obviously the entire world has changed from a mindset perspective because of the internet opening our eyes and bridging those gaps. So they want somebody like me who understands what it's like to talk to mom and dad at home and, get lectured for not getting good grades, things like that. But also somebody like me who understands what it's like to raise kids in a new modern way, and infusing the cultures and understanding what's important. So I think that's why I resonate with this very distinct second generation Indian person in America, because I lived it. I'm a living example.
But these clients that you're serving, however, right? Has there ever been a point where you've had a client that was unmatchable or difficult or challenging?
Challenging, yes. Oh, for sure. Unmatchable, no. It's just, I think that one, if we're there to the point where they go, you're too unmatchable, let's dial back some expectations. Let's talk about compromises and really get into the heart of what you're looking for. And it's also a waiting game, right? Like, just because I can't match you right now doesn't mean that I'm not going to go out there, recruit, find new people, or be in spaces that would have more closely aligned with the people you're looking for, and doing that work, right? That's why a lot of times you come to a matchmaker, because you want somebody who's going to do the work for you.
Got it.
And so I won't say you're unmatchable. It just might take us a little bit longer.
And that's fair, but give me an example of one of the more, without naming any names, one of the more challenging clients you've ever had to deal with, and why were they challenging?
I have a client who is gung-ho on marrying an Ivy League educated doctor. And to the point where her mom has called me. Yes.
I'm shocked. So all your clients are challenging. Got it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. No, but to the point where like her mom will call me, like she's cried on the phone with me, like, Radha, you don't know how hard it is out there. My daughter's amazing. We just want this for our family. And I'm like, on one hand, I'm like, okay, auntie, I get it. Like, I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can. On the other hand, I'm like, let's realign expectations. Where is this coming from? Why? Like, is it that's what you think that's being secure financially looks like for your family? Like, let's peel back some of these layers. Maybe you need to go through coaching and like realign expectations. Haven't been successful in changing kind of what their criteria are, but I think I've challenged her, at least conversationally, to rethink what she's looking for.
And how long has that process been going?
Over a year, probably. Yeah.
Over a year. And are they like frustrated at you, or are they just frustrated at themselves?
I think they're frustrated in general, not themselves or at me, because I'm not the only avenue that they're using. Obviously, there's a whole business behind matching people outside of just apps and matchmakers. There's classifieds, there's religious networks, there's a lot of other ways. So I think that I've heard from my client's mother, the exasperation is that they're trying everything, which is another reason I'm in my mind, I'm like, well, if you're trying everything, where do we think the problem is? Like I try to say it in a nice way. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but like, if you're trying everything and nothing is working, there's something there. Right.
So basically, if you're doing everything, then what is the commonality of all the issues? Might be in what you're seeking. Well, that's where the compromise comes in. But you don't like using that word.
No, compromise is fine. I just want to paint it in a positive way, right?
Fair enough. Because you in sales right now.
But I truly believe it, Jeff. I'm not trying to sell anybody. I really believe it.
I'm being facetious, but let me ask you this: when you do make a positive match, right? Some people that get together, right? Whether it's you that's doing it for a non-traditional, Indian couple, or for another matchmaker doing it for an Indian couple, who's getting in an arranged marriage. How often are you following up with the couple post-marriage?
Probably nothing more outside of the annual kind of anniversary or congratulations message, because again, we're not in the coaching aspect of the relationship business. So for us, it's a success story. It's kind of like an OBGYN, right? Yeah, they delivered the baby. That's awesome. But now we're going to hand you off to a pediatrician, right? So there's different stages to a relationship, finding a relationship versus maintaining one. So I don't stay too involved afterwards, but I'm here as a friend always.
But the reason why I asked that is some of what you do is kind of like you're kind of projecting or predicting value for each partner, right? Mm-hmm. But in order to see it actualized, you kind of have to see it in action, right? In order to know if you did a good job or if you're like truly matching people for long term. Because as we said earlier, sometimes you match people based on not you, but sometimes people seek people based on where they're at right now. And then as things evolve, they realize they weren't really that compatible, right? And that could be for a number of reasons. But sometimes there are things you could have been able to predict or assess from the beginning to say, this would have never worked, right? And do you feel like if you had followed up with some of the partners who married, who are like suffering in silence, you might have been like, okay, moving forward, I'm not going to match people who XXX. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, in all candidness, I've been in business just over 3 years. So I don't think I've gotten to the stage where I've got couples that have been in multi-year relationships. So that probably might be why. But I like that idea, and I see where you're going with that. I think that there possibly could be more of an outreach or things that we could do. But also, if you think about it, right, if it's a successful, happy marriage and it's still in the first couple of years, do you really want to constantly be rehashing that with a matchmaker, or kind of like, I'm a stranger at the end of the day, right? I'm not your best friend. So I don't know. Maybe there's more there that I should do, but I
wouldn't say to do that with everyone, but kind of like get a sample size just to kind of like, do a self-check-in as a service, because I know like a lot of people get satisfied with the idea of just getting matched, getting married or engaged. But like if we're really putting people together for like long-term value in their relationships and in their lives, like I think it's very important to like really check what we're doing as a community as a whole, not just you or anything, but just to be like, okay, is this really adding value to the community? Is this really adding value to people? Because you yourself said that, when people were in arranged marriages, like they were suffering in silence. There was a lot of abuse, not in all scenarios, because there's success stories, but like there are some people where it's a stigma to get divorced. So they just tough it out. They don't know. Right. So I would say when someone's paying, I don't know how much do people pay for your services generally, or just in general for matchmaking, like in that community?
Yeah, we're one on the more affordable side because again, we're really trying to make it a modern approach to it.
Got it.
So it's nothing crazy. It's very affordable.
So it's very affordable, but in reality, it's still more expensive than a dating app, right?
Yes, it's going to be more expensive because you're paying for that personalized touch and that time, right? So a lot, you're getting so much of our dedicated time, and time is a commodity, and that's what we pay for.
Sure. So if it's a more expensive endeavor, that means they're investing a lot more. So if they're investing a lot, it might be harder for them to break away from that decision, especially after they've already married the person and so on and so forth. So I would, me personally, love to know how, what the Yelp review is for that marriage that was matched by somebody else. It'd be interesting to know.
Yeah. So I will say I had a couple that broke off their engagement. And so I did an extensive deep dive with each of them afterwards to understand all of that. Yeah. And that came up more so from them telling me that they broke it off versus us checking in with them. So I agree. Maybe there is a better proactive way for us to continue to measure our success, even post relationship or post commitment. Yeah. I like that.
Especially if the couples that you did match that are success, if they can be champions or mentors of your new couples, right? So that way they're like, look at this community of happy couples that this company has cultivated. I definitely want to be a part of this. You know what I mean? And anyway, and community is what we strive for, right? So if you look at our website, we call ourselves a community of South Asian marriage-minded daters because we offer a lot more than just matchmaking. We're here to help you, commiserate with you to every aspect of your dating journey. Again, it's a journey. It's not a destination to get married. So we offer a lot of that. And even if we can't necessarily address it, I'm a connector by heart. I've got all these partners. We've got coaching partners. We've got therapist partners. I'm here to support you throughout your journey. So yeah, I definitely think that there's probably a follow-up. So continue supporting after that. We could probably incorporate that'll just serve as a feedback loop to make what we do as our main business even better and stronger. I like that.
I'll take that as a takeaway, Jeff.
Yeah. It's just a thought. But another thing is, so you have 2 kids, right?
I do. Yep.
You have 2 kids. And what are their ages?
My son is 10 and my daughter is 6.
Okay. So would you say they're going to be even more modern?
Oh, for sure. We don't speak the language at home where we speak English. My mother-in-law's staying with us for the holiday. And so she's like, oh, but you don't have this spice and you don't have that. And I'm like, just go buy whatever you want because when you leave, it's literally just going to expire in my fridge. We don't, you know what I mean? Like we don't cook traditionally at home. We're very modern Indian family and our kids are going to be even more kind of integrated and into the culture, but they're creating their own culture is the way I see it. And it's a hybrid of all of this.
Okay. So be that as it may, right? What message do you have for your son and your daughter as they get older in the pursuit of their partnerships?
For me, it's making sure that somebody makes you feel special, happy, equal. It's more so the feeling of what they do for you or like how they help you. And that's it. And vice versa. You have to be able to contribute that back to your partner as well. I want them to think of it as an individual responsibility versus I'm doing this for the family or I'm doing this for the community. I want to give them that independence in thinking that not saying that my parents didn't give it to me. Maybe it just wasn't nurtured. How about that? I want to do that for them.
That's good. And hopefully they listen to you.
At the end of the day, so like we also work with LGBTQ plus individuals as well. Because at the end of the day, I think there's way more nuances. I mean, you know, in any community, immigrant or not, like African-American communities, Hispanic communities, there's a lot of cultural shared experiences that we have that I want to stay. So just because I'm from a certain part of India versus another part, it doesn't need to be that granular. But somebody who understands growing up with parents that speak a different language or growing up where in a rural part of America where people didn't know the food I was eating, getting that vibe essentially of who I am as a person. I want you to identify that in me and I want to be able to identify that in you. It happens to be that, you're going to cluster into your individual communities, but that's what I want from my kids is that if you find that person who fulfills you and makes you happy, and they also happen to have a shared experience in upbringing and language, that's going to make it even more better.
Absolutely. But you just said something that now I'm curious about. You just said you also participate in the LGBTQ community. In what sense? You match them?
Yeah, we do. We take on clients who identify that way.
Sure. But specifically Indian clients.
Only Indian clients. I only work with South Asians. Yeah.
Okay. So see now my brain's going in a bunch of different. So here's where my mind's at, right? I take it that you identify yourself as an Indian matchmaker because there's a lot of the nuances of being an Indian that you would have to know and be able to like take into account when you're matching people, right? Especially when you're considering the pressures from family.
Right.
How supportive are family members towards Indians who are part of the LGBTQ community who want to get married and find partnership?
It's evolving. It's definitely evolving. You know, you hear, I mean, I have some clients who are not out to their families and they're working with me to see if they can find somebody that identifies as Indian and is also, oriented the way they are because they want to find that. And that'll give them maybe that strength to come out and strength to be like, well, at least he gets our family dynamic and he speaks the same language. Like maybe that'll ease it or bring that compatibility to the forefront. But then on the other hand, I've got, my own friends and family who are out and proud. You see the family dynamic shifting because it's a firsthand experience. I think the Indians are not any different than any other community when it comes to like, if you have somebody in your family that is any type of way, right? Like doctor, lawyer, engineer, gay, straight, or whatever, you're going to understand it better because you're seeing it and you love that person who is now bringing this into your life. It's an evolution and the whole world is evolving on this topic, not just Indians.
And I agree with you, but the reason why I'm particularly curious about what that dynamic is like in the Indian community is because from my understanding, when an Indian is marrying another Indian, you're talking about blending large families together, right? Mm-hmm. And then when you're having weddings, it's like a mosh pit, right? So if you're part of the LGBTQ community, I would imagine that it's a lot easier to bond with your partner more privately, right? As well as like you have a close-knit group of people who support you, and you you have your wedding and so on and so forth. And you might have a big wedding depending on how supportive your group is. But like if you're talking about the Indian community who are ultimately very traditional, right? And I imagine there's a lot of traditional gender roles that are associated with it, right? Yeah. So if you have 1,000 people come to a wedding, I'm going to imagine not all 1,000 people are progressive, right?
Not at all. Yeah.
Right. So is an LGBTQ person going to be able to have a similar experience in their courtship and marriage when they are not in a community that might support them the way that they want to be supported?
Maybe, maybe not. And why I say that is because it's not just that. So there's a big taboo, or we're working against it, but like marrying outside of the culture, right? Why are we even talking about Indian matchmaking? Is because they want you to marry another Indian person. So there's so many people that don't date Indian. They're still, identify as straight, but they date different cultures. I myself dated non-Indians before I got married. But why? How you're going to approach that with your family is still very similar. They don't know. I never introduced my parents to any of my boyfriends before marriage, right? So the traditional element is traditional across the board. Yeah. And if you are in a family that's going to support you as an individual and what you're looking for and who you find on your own or through a matchmaker, I'm hoping that at least your immediate family is more progressive and supportive. And then when you are branching out to celebrating that through a wedding ceremony, you're only going to invite the people that appreciate and celebrate you and your story. You're not going to invite the haters. So you might not have 1,000-person wedding, but you're going to have 150 people who love you and celebrate you and that relationship.
So what do you think is harder? Someone that's part of the LGBTQ community presenting their partner to their parents, like their Indian LGBTQ partner or counterpart, or someone who is straight but presenting someone that's outside the Indian culture?
It probably is going to be the former, just because, then the idea like, okay, fine, we'll get over, we've understood that you're looking for a same-sex partner, whatever, you're going to get married, great. But then that concept of children, because children is still such a big part of our community. Again, traditional culture, marriage is for children, right? That not marriage isn't for fun. It's to have kids and procreate and move on. And so I think it's harder to explain that, yes, I'm doing this and my path towards being a mother or a father is going to look different. It's going to be more challenging. So I think that it's harder to kind of broach that gap because at the end of the day, a man and a woman is still considered quote unquote traditional.
Right. But you're saying the latter one is the one that they're going to accept more? That's the one that's easier?
Yeah. I mean, growing up, I knew so many people that there's drama and fighting and tears and all that, but that ended up at the end of the day marrying a non-Indian person. But I didn't hear about the first kind of same sex. And personally, I don't know of anybody myself, but I see it now. It's celebrated so well in media. But I would say in the last 10 years is when I first started seeing it go mainstream. So that's a huge arc, right? Whereas 30 years ago, we were married. My husband has an uncle, a granduncle, in the 50s who married a Caucasian woman. So that was much more accepted. And I think also maybe a part of colonization and all that, we saw mixed marriages happening back in the motherland and all. So that's a little bit more normalized, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm imagining when you're talking about the aunties, like, you know what I'm saying? You bring in a same-sex partner and you're like, yeah, we're going to have a baby through surrogacy and through lab work. And she's going to pass out and have a, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to imagine their reaction and, which I will credit just to kind of like bring all of this to a close is that when you've got people who are marrying later in their mid 30s, late 40s, talking about having families, already those concepts of fertility, surrogacy, that's already being introduced in that uncle and auntie generation. So they're a little bit more familiar. And you add on maybe another layer of, now it's a same sex couple, but you've already become familiar with the concepts of surrogacy and IVF and this and that. So at that point, it's a little bit less of a barrier,
to approach.
Okay, fair enough. Listen, this has been quite the conversation. My brain is like doing backflips, to be honest with you. Especially that latter end of the conversation. It took me down a turn that I'm just like, I'm glad I know this now. Do you have a way that people can reach you, or do you have any programs that people can partake in?
Absolutely. So our website, singledashadi.com, and we are on all the socials at Single to Shadi. And personally, if you want to email me directly, if you have a question about what I talked about or want to know more, it's my first name, Radha, at singledashadi.com. So yeah, we're here to talk through anything. There's a lot, again, of apprehension, nervousness, and people don't get the idea of modern matchmaking versus traditional. So I'm here, and thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity to kind of get that message out there. And it's been eye-opening for me because you're now showing me better ways to strengthen my brand and my business and deliver a better experience for my clients. So this was mind-opening for me as well. Thank you so much.
Right on. And I appreciate you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jeff Damisse. You can find me at j.damisse on IG or j_damisse for Twitter. But for the podcast, you can find us at Introspect_Club. That's on everything. That's on TikTok, IG, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. If you guys have any questions that you want me to ask my guests, please make sure you DM me at Introspect_Club for IG. Or if you're someone who has an interesting experience or live a very unique life that other people can learn from, reach out to me. I might be able to get you on the show. This was a great conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Until next time.